One time a student asked me, well, if there are these archetypes, why don't we just tell the archetype over and over? Why do we need fiction, for example, which is like a bridge? If there's individuals here and the archetype is up here, you know, at a high level of abstraction, fiction sort of fills the gap between them. And so what you want is a story that's archetypal so that you understand its basic structure, but you want enough variation and specificity so that it's new and interesting and also applicable to you. So you have to humanize the archetype to some degree, otherwise it's so abstract you can't relate to it. And good stories really do that. They bridge the gap, and some of them are more personal and less archetypal, but if they're completely non-archetypal, there's nothing about them that captures you. It doesn't have any force. And then if it's too archetypal, well, it gets to be too abstract and you can't relate to it. So good fiction writers and good purveyors of dramatic entertainment, we think about it as entertainment, are really good at occupying that middle position.
Let's put this tool into practice with some examples. A meme complex like Lord of the Rings is very archetypal. Not only do the characters experience deeply archetypal trials, tribulations, and victories, but the overarching story is also literally a battle between good and evil. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you might have a movie like Marriage Story, which is a very realistic and grounded depiction of the complexity of romantic relationships. And in between these, you might have a meme complex like The Dark Knight. Technically, there are no magical or otherworldly elements in this movie, but the Joker is, for all intents and purposes, a god who experiences no attachment to worldly desires and is immune to physical pain or fear of death. Of course, he's still mundane enough to get annoyed at a mild dig.
You're crazy. I'm not. No, I'm not.
You can begin to see how any work of fiction, or meme, can be plotted somewhere on this chart. Game of Thrones deals with much grayer lines between good and evil than Lord of the Rings, although still has its pure archetypal elements. Arthur Fleck's Joker definitely pushes the boundaries of realism, but his character development and everyday struggles are much more mundane and relatable. One important thing to note is that while the y-axis says mimetic fitness, the archetypicality of a meme really only affects the durability component of mimetic fitness. The accessibility of a meme has more to do with the medium the meme operates in, and a number of other factors that we'll have to explore later. Also, I know it looks like the curve implies that the Joker has a higher level of mimetic fitness than Lord of the Rings, and for some people it might, but I'm treating every meme on the blue line as being the same category of mimetically fit, and I could just as easily use a flat blue line if it didn't look so stupid. Now, aside from plotting fictional movies, the archetypal meme curve can be used in a much more focused manner by analyzing and isolating one archetype at a time. For example, a very common archetype is that of the shadow. Every human being has a dark side they must learn to integrate into their conscious awareness in order to develop their own confidence and autonomy. An abstract image of a generic shadow would contain this idea, although the image alone would not be very impactful. If you keep the same image but add a relatable twist to it, it suddenly becomes a much more mimetically fit meme as you connect it to many people's childhood. Or you can create an entire television series like Breaking Bad, which achieves its psychological potency by centering the whole show on this very archetype. You can plot out the mimetic fitness of a meme using any of the fundamental archetypes, and this becomes especially important when it comes to evaluating political meme complexes.
Political stories derive their power from the underlying archetypal representations. Obviously, because they have to be concerned with the things that people find important, right? How can you sell a political message to someone if it isn't about something they find important? And if it's important to them, it's going to be grounded at least to some degree in their biological in their biological substructure. I mean, if you're talking to hungry people about food, it's a story that you can tell, right? Because it hooks them deeply. It hooks deep into their motivational systems. To use a narrative of utopia, which is the land of milk and honey, roughly speaking, a very, very old idea, you're also tapping deeply into intrinsic human longings. And so the idea that political narratives incorporate archetypal themes is not really, it's not an idea that I would consider particularly controversial. Putting it that way might be.
If you want to advance a particular political ideology, you have to be able to identify which archetypes you can draw upon to imbue your political message with psychological potency. There are dozens of diagrams in Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning, but I believe this is the single most important one. While imperfect and incomplete, it illustrates what I think is the best way to isolate and identify the archetypes that give memes their power. Each circle is one of the three fundamental archetypal categories that the human psyche has adapted to: nature, culture, and the individual, each having both a positive and negative aspect. Just as every instance of physical reality can be broken down into three fundamental particles called protons, neutrons, and electrons, we can say that every instance of phenomenological reality, which is the reality that human beings experience, is made up of the intersection of the natural world, the social world, and the inner world. This trichotomy maps very well onto Freud's concepts of the ego, id, and superego. The outside circle is nature. This is the archetype that is most active in meme complexes like Planet Earth or the Avatar movies. Its positive aspect is the archetype that dominates the psyche of environmentalists and people whose primary concern is the preservation of the planet.
Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people?
The second inner circle is culture. The positive aspect of culture is represented as the wise king or the good father. Its most abstract form takes the shape of God the Father, but the same archetype is active when we interact with memes like Gandalf, Uncle Phil, Mustafa, or any historically mythologized father figure like Martin Luther King or George Washington. Nationalist political ideologies like MAGA draw their archetypal force from the idea of America as a once great nation in need of revival. Peterson would describe this as rescuing the father from the belly of the whale. Of course, if you're an ultra-progressive, the exact same meme would constellate the archetype of the negative aspect of culture, which is representative of corruption and oppression. Figures like Scar, Denethor, or the Emperor Palpatine embody this archetype, as well as historically mythologized tyrants like Joseph Stalin or a certain German dictator. Lastly, you have the individual as hero or adversary, which at this point I suspect is fairly self-explanatory. What all of this points to is a way of viewing ideas and ideologies that allows us to better manipulate them and understand their danger. No ideology or belief system can be complete if it focuses on some archetypes at the exclusion of others.
The problem with political narratives, in my estimation, is that they can rapidly transform themselves into ideologies, and ideologies are dangerous for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason for their danger, I think, this is a hypothesis, is because of their one-sided nature. What happens is that they capitalize, parasitize, I think is even a better way of thinking about it, a profound underlying narrative, but they don't tell the entire story. I can give you a quick example of that. I'll do it very quickly. So when the American West was settled, it was settled on the wave of an ideological story. Right. And here's the story. Heroic individual, that's positive, bringing positive culture, that's the wise king, into virgin or into chaotic territory. That's the negative mother, essentially. So that's positive individual, positive culture, negative nature. Right? And that's a motivating story, man, to heroically bring order into the untamed wilderness. It's like 1 million people a year from Europe come driven by that narrative. Yep. It's okay, well, here's the counter narrative. Raping and pillaging individual, bringing the desolations of tyrannical culture into the virginal, wonderful, environmental, what do you call it?
Utopia?
Yes, of nature. Yep. It's like, yeah, man, you can get a long way with that story too. Yeah. But they're both half the story. So you just put those two things together and you have a religious story. It's like, well, the individual is heroic, but also is an adversary, and a cruel adversary at that. Culture is the wise king, but it's also the evil tyrant. And nature is beautiful and wonderful French impressionistic landscape, and cancer, and Anopheles mosquitoes, and elephantiasis. And so if you are properly oriented in the world, you tell yourself both those stories and you say, oh my God, they conflict. It's like, yeah, they do, man. That's exactly right. Okay. So an ideology just pulls out a subset of the religious characters and says, this is the entire reality. Right. It's like, no, it's not. Right. It's a parasitical meme, essentially. An ideology is a parasitical meme on a religious substructure.